Thank you, Chairman. Good to see you, Lord Tyrie. So if I can see if I got your arguments sort of right in my head. So in your IPPR paper and in your Policy Institute paper and other times, you talked about a sort of growing distrust in markets. And today you've referred to that in the context that that's because they're not competitive markets not being seen to deliver for consumers, that you are concerned that there is a growing interest in an alternative approach to markets, which is a more of a dirigist, government-driven interventionist, and that it's important to protect competition, this great deliverer of living standards around the world, by having competition policy move to fill this gap of distrust, which is therefore to say we're more on the side of the consumers. Is that essentially your core of your argument?
100%.
So let's just ask the first part then. What is, other than anecdote, just remind us, what's the evidence for growing distrust that's out there? Is it a feeling? Is there sort of a whole body of research to support the premise for that construction?
This is a complex and controversial issue, and I don't have it to hand, although I have published it. You'll find it in various things I've published, and if I had more time, I would spend 30 seconds now looking it up and read it to the committee. But I will be able to point the clerk to material that supports that view after this hearing.
Okay, that would be helpful if you could. And then, just on the other side, if we move away from a sort of really clear focus that competition delivers better products, you could trust the market, into we need to be on the consumer side. And I know that I believe your perspective on promoting consumers is within the framework of improving competition to deliver that. But are you not at risk of achieving another tool for the interventionists? You've spoken earlier on about the fact that regulators aren't overseen by Parliament. You've talked about their connections and how cosy they are with their own industry, how cosy they are on mandarins. If we move away from competition to something that sounds good, which is pro-consumer, aren't you actually inadvertently giving the dirigists another tool?
Well, I think that's a counsel of despair, even if we may end up all despairing, which is unlikely. That's an argument for saying we'd better not develop this particular tool, because while we know how to use it well for the benefit of the whole community to deal with detriment, somebody might one day get their hands on it and do enormous damage with it. So we should stick with something that's demonstrably second or third best. I suppose it's an argument worth thinking through. My initial response to that question, which I've not often been posed, would be to say, I think that the settlement which has facilitated competition since the Cold War ended, and which everybody thought was right, which led to the creation of these highly technocratic competition bodies over the last 30 years. About 130 countries have brought in legislation very similar to ours, including ours. That which is already being challenged, and particularly since it predated the crash, but particularly since the crash has been heavily challenged, will be challenged to the point of destruction. And at that point, we've lost the benefits of competition anyway. There will be public revolts in some countries, and there will be political instability.
Good. One final question, Chair. If the government moves with this pro-consumer model to bring the remit, should the remit of the CMA include public services where people consume appointments with their GPs? A lot of my constituents have had concerns about that. And other public services. Should the CMA's remit cover all aspects of where people engage with products and services?
In principle, it already does. The CMA does already have that statutory reach. I said that it only...
of the public services has the CMA ever undertaken?
It has a capacity to advise government. This is the power of advocacy. It has a responsibility, which amounts to a duty, although the word responsibility is used, to advise government on where to act, where its legislative base, direct legislative base, may not be strong enough to enable them to act. And furthermore, the strategic steer which the Secretary of State writes to every few years, I think every 3, to the CMA, says that they should be robust and speak up, and I think
that's all very well, but you haven't yet answered my question about how many investigations have taken place. Let me ask you just a straight question, but I know we need to move on.
Oh,
from the point of view of consumers, from the point of view,
may I just answer your question?
Okay.
My answer to your question is, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but that doesn't surprise me. What does concern me much more is that I can't think in the public domain of very many cases where the CMA has used its advocacy powers to tell the government what it thinks need to be
But isn't
done.
it a logical conclusion, given that my constituents, residents of the country, consume a wide array of services that are in the public sector, as they do in the private sector, that if there is a change in competition policy that focuses on the consumer, then the remit and the power of that and the inspection powers of the CMA should be as robust on public services as they are on private sector services?
I think in principle, yes, but I would like to reflect fully before giving you a 100% yes to the question. It's a very interesting thought. One aspect of it I had started to think through when I was at the CMA. My priority was, as you can see, to get proposals out on legislative base to try and get the CMA to act in a more balanced way to push forward all its statutory responsibilities. I, as I said, wasn't able to take the board with me on enough of that. But I did succeed, I think, since I've left Parliament in changing the terms of, since I left the CMA, in changing the terms of trade on this whole debate, at least to some degree. I think I've had more influence from the outside than I had from within. That in itself tells a story about the way some of these regulators currently operate.
Super. Well,